So what are you doing?
Nothing.
Nothing? Why not?
I'm trying to get on this Lifestyle Radio website.
Sounds like a cool website.
Yeah, it's alright. Oh, wait, I might have it.
You might have it.
You're listening to Lifestyle Radio.
The opinions expressed during this show are those of the individual participants and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of their associated organizations or Lifestyle Radio.
Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of Pottawa. Yes, Pottawa, brought to you by Braun Solution, providing you with the knowledge to provide for yourself. These are cannabis growing consultants, and you can find them on Instagram at the Braun Solution. And this has been another busy, crazy week, as I'm sure you guys are all well aware. One of the big pieces of news is this guy, Shane King, a very well-known, very well-loved pot activist and father. He died, he was 32, he left 4 kids behind and a wife. He died Saturday shortly after colliding with the rear of a garbage truck in El Canotal area of Alsa Mujeres, which I guess is in Mexico. And there's if you go read the article, if you just look up the name Shane King, there's a GoFundMe page, and they're trying to raise money for the family because he was a father of 4. So they need help. And he was I didn't know him myself personally, never met him. We were kind of just friends on Facebook. And, he's posting the other day, cool stuff. And he was this groovy guy with dreads. And everybody says everyone's kind of devastated because he was such an awesome guy. So go have a look at that. Go check it out and donate if you can. In other news, should be of no secret, I'm sure you've heard about this already, that the government has come up with their regulations for packaging, which has been pretty embarrassing. They have these packages, as you can see, and you have to go to the website. So you just go check it out on Twitter, marijuana packaging, and you'll see that they've got these really drab package designs. And this is what all the LPs have to adhere to. So when you go to the pot store, all the bags are going to look the same. They're basically a big warning label with the name in the corner and the brand in the corner. And it says, there's all this warning label, and it'll show the THC and CBD levels, and that's about it. They're treating it, even the media has noticed that it's being treated like it's way more dangerous than tobacco or alcohol, even though Health Canada's own website recognizes, and they say that the task force recognizes that alcohol and tobacco are substantially more dangerous. So why not similarity in labeling? Which brings us to things like Hires Root Beer with vodka, or Spiked Pop Shop, or, Mike's Hard Lemonade, if that's still around. There's all kinds of drinks that are colorful and fun looking, and they're full of sugar and caffeine and alcohol. There's also these drinks that are energy drinks mixed with alcohol, basically Red Bull and alcohol. And they have a bunch of different names, and they're pretty stout. In fact, a girl in Ontario died recently from using some of it. And how, underage kids get a hold of booze? Well, the same way they've always got a hold of booze, I suppose. But she got a hold of some, and people got all mad because the store sells it, so the store says they're going to stop selling that stuff. How this stuff even became legal is a mystery. I think it's more a case of it isn't illegal yet. I don't think making it illegal is going to help. It'll probably happen anyway. But because there's somebody, talking about how these things should be better regulated and stuff, I think labeling should certainly be less exhilarating. And in terms of cannabis regulation for labeling, I think it's fair to say, out of respect for the 70 to 80% of the population who are probably not even going to try cannabis, that we don't really want, cartoon tigers on the outside of our cannabis packages like we have on children's cereal, for example. But at the same time, companies need to be able to have logos and, different names and stuff, so the customer can differentiate between brands, know what they're getting. You got to have different colored labels for different flavors. Let's say you're a company that sells shatter, and you've got 5 different strains. Some are high THC, some are CBD, a couple of hybrids. You want to have different colored labels for those things so people will just remember. That's how advertising works. you see those golden arches, your mouth starts to water because of what you've eaten at McDonald's or because you're about to throw up, depending on your experiences you've had there. So the point being that people need to have this. Now, there needs to be more of a compromise. And if you go see the labels, they're pretty much all warning. It's absurd. And to me, this is just embarrassing because there's no way that the people who went and talked to the task force, and I know this because my friend Stitch went and sat through absolutely every moment of it as a spectator, no one on that task force in any of the hearings said, what you need is totally strict labeling. Maybe a few did, but that could not have been the consensus because smart people know that super strict labeling with no ability for the customer to differentiate is going to cause some confusion. So if the government doesn't relent and at least allow for different color packaging and different, sorts of things, they're still just going to be acquiescing to the black market. Or the black market, which I say affectionately because that's the real market, right? The head shops, the dispensaries, the lounges. This is the real cannabis culture in Canada. Marijuana culture, pot culture, whatever you want to call it. This is who we are. And there are long, 40-something gray hairs like me. There are people with dreadlocks. There are very clean-cut people. There are people all shaved and covered in tattoos. We hit all spans of all walks of life. It's very broad. It's not like, say, the gay thing. I'm bisexual myself, so it's kind of something you kind of have to be born into. It's a club you can't really join. You might visit a few times, but you can't sort of join up. With pot's coming for everybody. The old, the young, babies not yet born because their mothers are using it for morning sickness. This kind of thing. We're coming for everybody. I think pot's going to be as big as kale, but I'm very optimistic about how pot is going to surge into the culture and continue to surge into the culture, I should say, because it's unstoppable now. It's just this big snowball that's rolling down a hill and it's flattening every cabin that it goes by, and it's gathering up trees with it as it goes, and the government is still trying to slow it down, and that's very disappointing. That's got me feeling pretty gloomy. Because, not just because, they didn't do the cool thing I wanted them to do, but because it's embarrassing and humiliating and disheartening to live in a country that is supposed to be full of intelligent people and supposedly run by intelligent people who do things with their policy, their cannabis policy and other policies, that are so brazenly wrong and stupid, and that even the media is picking up on it. That's really hard for me to live with. And a lot of other people go, and they watch the hockey game or they have a beer or whatever like that. Unfortunately, I'm kind of stuck really thinking about this stuff all the time and a bunch of other stuff that I've got going on in my own life. So it's hard to stay optimistic in the face of all of this. Not because I think, we're going to lose and then pot's just going to fade and no one's going to think about it anymore, like some fad that passed that I can't even remember right now, something that obscure. No, pot is going to continue to surge into the culture, and there's nothing is going to stop it. Every year, the government and the cops put more and more and more and more effort into prohibiting the use of cannabis. Every year since the early 60s, it's getting a little harder and a little harder and a little harder and a little harder, and we still won handily. Up until a few years ago, the media was always still hammering us away with, anti-pot rhetoric all the time. Even Hollywood and TV, they still got to make pot look like it's a bunch of stupid people doing a bunch of stupid stuff. And we still have gathered bigger numbers, and it's growing even more. So now that it's legal in a bunch of states and people can talk about it freely, and people say, by the way, here's all the medical benefits I've been getting from just using pot instead of these pills or whatever. That's going to spread like wildfire, man. Word of thumb is going to spread. People's phones are their communication device. It's almost like we're the Borg now. Some people don't even have home computers anymore. They just use their phone. So pot's going to spread. It's just going to continue to spread. But we have to be diligent because the government will not relent on trying to hinder and stifle not only the industry, but the culture. And I can't really understand why they would do this. And I think the only reason I can come up with is they're just pandering to the stupid voters. Maybe the Liberal government knows pot's as safe as chocolate or coffee. They know perfectly well that it's not going to kill anybody. They know perfectly well that it needs to be regulated more loosely. But it's not a vote getter. Not yet, anyway. This wasn't a vote getter 10 years ago. It is now. So who knows what the future holds for that, but we'll have to see. I don't trust the Liberals to do anything right. Not, the line between where their stupidity ends and their corruption begins is very, very soft and blurry. So next thing I wanted to talk about was this. 10 new cannabis stocks are being added to Canada's largest pot ETF. The management, that's trading. So this is something that's interesting, is that, just 5-6 years ago, people were like, oh, they're never going to legalize pot. Pot's not going to this and that. Now we're seeing they're on the stock exchange. They're on the stock exchange. Cannabis companies are on the stock exchange. Biggest cannabis producing company in the world is just a little south here of Ottawa. So, things are changing, and they're changing rapidly. Unfortunately, the government is digging in their heels and putting a lot of drag lines out, and they're really making it hard for everybody. Now, here's a good one. Health Canada aims to demand financial information about pot investors to fight organized crime. As we've talked about before on the show, many of these companies, 40% of these companies, have had money injected into them from places like the Cayman Islands and Switzerland and other places that have these sort of tax-free or these tax haven bank accounts where shady people can put shady money into the banking system with legitimate people who have legitimate money in the banking system. And this bank can invest on their behalf and not get anybody in any trouble. So, the government said they wanted to keep it away from organized crime. Well, it looks like they're trying to hand it to organized crime, because if this kind of stuff is allowed to continue, we're going to have all kinds of shady people who might end up with controlling interest in a company that's owned and operated in Canada, and suddenly it's not owned by Canadians anymore. So this is something you got to go check out this article. This is in the National Post. A horrible rag, but still, this is an interesting bit of an article in regards to that topic. Other thing, what do we got here? Here we go. Treat marijuana like any other farm crop, the group tells the city. This is in Hamilton, and this is off the CBC. And people are complaining, hey, don't use farmland for pot and put up a greenhouse and stuff. It's like, well, wait a minute. Pot is farm. Pot is farming. Pot's farming just like people who farm anything else. It's an agricultural crop. That's what it is. And I'm not even talking about hemp, which we'll get to another time or tomorrow or later or whatever, not tomorrow, but later. This is the thing, is it is a crop. Now, what I would recommend, I think I've mentioned this before, is don't use good land that's already being used for food, for pot, for recreational pot, for medical pot. Bunch of reasons. Outdoor, you're risking too much. You're not going to get the same sort of yield. Well, you're going to get a bigger yield, but it's not going to be as good. Bugs, mold, frost, all kinds of problems you can have with growing outdoor. Greenhouse is the way to go. Now, a greenhouse, you can put up on all kinds of crappy land because you're not going to grow the pot in that soil. You're going to grow it in soil or some other kind of substrate or just hydroponically or something, hopefully. And just use crappy land. There's plenty of places around Ottawa, between Ottawa and Orleans, huge, vast areas of yellow, goldenrod, this ragweed stuff. I mean, there's just acres and acres and acres and acres of it around Ottawa. And it's I don't know who even owns the land, if it's the city or the province or the federal government or what, but you drive, through the summer, you drive around anywhere around Ottawa. When you get to the rural areas, tons of ragweed. So you find a place that's 5, 10, 20 acres, plop. You put a big greenhouse on it. You grow pot in water or whatever you're going to grow it in, and everybody's happy. put up maybe some solar panels to run the lights, this kind of stuff. Yes, greenhouses, you need lights for those who don't know about it. So, people are complaining. First they were complaining, well, what about the smell? And, it's going to attract bikers. And now they're like, okay, that's not going to happen. Now they're worried about, well, now you're using up good land. I mean, why are you using the green belt? Why are you using farmland for this crop? And which raises the question, what else do we grow that's pretty frivolous on planet Earth? We grow a lot of tulips in Ottawa, but it's mostly in flower beds and stuff. It's not like we have farmland full of flower beds. I think most of the tulips we have here are imported anyway. But Holland, acres and acres and acres and acres and acres of tulips. Lots of places we grow lots and lots of flowers just for decoration. We grow flowers for fragrances to put in shampoos, for dogs. We put fruit into shampoos for humans and dogs, and all kinds of animals. We grow all kinds of food to feed pigs and cows and chickens and sheep and stuff so that they can be food, which is actually pretty cost prohibitive when you really examine the situation. So why are people pissing and moaning about pot growing in their vicinity? And I think it's just stigma again. It's all about stigma. They think pot is a bad thing. Don't use that land for pot. Use it for something that's good. Well, pot is good. It's better than the corn you're growing. It's better than a lot of the other crops that grow, especially around this part of Ontario. So people should stop being so damn cynical and jump on the bandwagon. Now, the real thing is not going to be pot in the future. Pot's going to be fun for a lot of people, and a lot of people are going to get into it. I think 50 or 60% of the population before I'm 60 years old, which is 12 years. No, I think the big thing is going to be hemp. And what we need to do is start bugging our MPs and our MPPs to start shifting money into hemp processing infrastructure. What I would recommend is local decortication systems like in every small town across the country, every rural community, maybe several of them, because they'd be right at the farm. There are small decortication machines you can get now that you can have on farms. The problem is drying. Farmer X would have to grow however many acres of hemp. Then he'd have to sit it there to dry somehow. And once it's good and dry, it can either be decorticated or it can be shipped off as dry rods, and decorticated someplace else. The other thing that can happen is you can make digesters. Just take all the green material when it's freshly harvested and put it in the big digester and make fuel out of it, methane, stuff like that. You can do it right there on the property with each farm having its own tank, and then they'd have their own fuel. It would be super cheap for the farmers to grow everything else because their fuel costs would be nothing. So they'd actually have too much fuel and have to sell it. So that would also help mitigate a lot of the problems we have with crude oil. But the problem, all of this, no matter what method of transport and drying and decortication and processing or whatever we do, it's all going to need infrastructure. Someone's going to need to put government or private sector money into this industry to get it up and running. Right now, the hemp industry, a farmer grows it, somebody comes, they chop the whole thing down, they take all the seeds with them as they go, and the stalks are left in a big pile to rot. Arguably the best part of the hemp plant is left to rot just for the flowers. So on that, I'm a little bit late now. I'm going to play a song. First song this week is from Rose Chronicles. It's called Glide, Free Above. It's from their album Shiver from 1994. Enjoy.
Hey, this is Cheech.
And this is Chong.
And you're listening to Lifestyle Radio.
What is it?
Lifestyle Radio. Say it one more time.
420 radio?
Ooh.
Hang up and try again.
You're listening to Lifestyle Radio.
Good. Welcome back. Welcome back. That was Rose Chronicles with Clyde. Interesting story here. Someone brought up the thing. Trudeau could be barred from the U.S. after he's PM because he smoked pot. This is what this lawyer said anyway. And it's pretty interesting because it makes me wonder, why is he not barred now? Is he allowed to visit now? Why is the PM of a country above this kind of same scrutiny? If he was just some Joe who was crossing the border or trying to fly into the States and they're like, hey, you ever smoke pot? Well, yeah, a couple times. Boom, get out. You're not coming back. We got your name. We got your face. You're not coming back. Go away. Not this guy. Pretty boy. He gets to go to the States if he needs to. You know, he's visiting with dignitaries and whatnot. Got to go visit Washington. Got to go to the UN. That's part of his job. Okay, fair enough. But why? How? How come he gets that? And it'll be interesting to see if the U.S. actually changes their policy anytime soon about border crossings, because I think us legalizing pot is going to make them look really stupid. And it's going to be difficult for them to maintain this air of security if they're bothering to ask for that. If you've ever smoked pot, it's so absurd, the world we live in. I find it very difficult to cope sometimes because so much of what is considered policy and what is considered normal by society too, not just though the government is doing absurd stuff. There's a lot of stuff society does that's totally absurd, and it scares me. You know, I feel myself as I get older drifting further and further away from popular culture because I don't watch Netflix and I don't eat junk food, so it makes it difficult to sort of relate to everybody. And another story, this is coming from Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia tables balanced budget with a $29.4 million surplus, relying heavily on cannabis sales. Yeah, Premier Stephen McNeil's, or Stephen, I guess, government is writing an anticipated wave of legal cannabis sales on a one-time payment from Ottawa on its third straight balanced budget. I think that's a little unrealistic. They've probably crunched the numbers to come up with that, but as I've said, there's still the situation as to whether or not pot's going to actually be legal, if the C-45 is going to pass, if C-46 is going to pass. Increasingly, it looks like the Senate is going to give some amendments. They're going to have to if they want to pass a constitutional law. So if the Liberals are able to concede and go with the amendments, then we might actually have a usable pot law. But there's a lot of bad things in this coming law. We were just talking off air about it. You know, if some parent gives pot to their kid because, for his daughter might have PMS or something, and she's 14, 15 years old, he could go to jail. Well, I doubt that, because it's not like the cops are going to bust in and say, oh, you did this. And, it's more likely, I think a judge is just going to go, okay, well, don't do that anymore because she's only 14, so there's a law. But I think what they're looking at is the person who is trying to sell in schools and person who is selling quantities to teenagers that sell in schools. I don't know any of those types of people, but I'm guessing that's where those sentences are aimed. And these are nonsense sentences because raping a child in Canada will only get you about 6 or 7 years, which is, astonishing. But you can go up to 14 years for selling some bud to a 15-year-old, which is scary, But I think once the constitutionality of those kinds of sentences are appealed, they're going to be struck down because, cruel and unusual punishment, as the saying goes. You can't have somebody who works as a bud tender selling pot every day to people who are 18 or 19 years old, depending on the province. And then if some guy shares some with a teenager for whatever reason, or some person sends some or sells some, suddenly they have to go to jail for 14 years. It's nonsense. So we live in a nonsense society. But I think Nova Scotia's government is a little optimistic. I think there's going to be shortages. I think they're not going to sell as much as they think they're going to sell because of shortages. They're going to sell out, is what I'm saying. All the pot's going to sell out, and there won't be enough to keep that market going. And people are going to start buying online from other provinces if they can. So I think they're a little optimistic. The next year, the following year, sure, yeah, for sure, $29.4 million surplus. I don't know how much they think they're going to say. Let me just see. It says in the article here. Yeah, 19.4 million is related to the taxes the government expects to receive from the sale of 12 million grams of recreational cannabis if Ottawa were to get the legalized market up and running by July. Of course, some people, their critics, are going to be like, oh my God, what about the horrible health problems we're going to have because of 12 million grams of recreational cannabis being smoked? Well, not all of it's going to be smoked. Some of it's going to be vaped. Some of it's going to be eaten and all kinds of stuff. And we're not likely to get any health problems, mainly benefits. If, of course, companies don't put any more myclobutanil in their products. That is something that frightens me quite a bit. They're still kicking around what to do about lounges in Ontario. I was talking to Lisa Campbell just, I guess, about an hour before the show. And she says they're looking at it, it's still kind of up in the air because she's lobbying. I mean, it's because of people like her and Abby Roach that we even have the government listening to stuff like that. So they said it's still up in the air, but it kind of looks promising that they might actually have to regulate lounges because there's not really much of a choice. You've got provinces who are saying, oh, you can't smoke it in rentals, you can't smoke it out in public at all, like it's booze or something. And, well, where are people going to smoke it if there's no lounges? If you can't smoke in your rental, and you can't smoke on the lawn of your rental, and you don't own a home, and you can't smoke it in public, and there's no lounges, you're literally not allowed to use pot. You can buy it, but that's it. You can't do anything with it. You can't smoke it. And you're not technically allowed to ingest it, so you can't sort of walk out of the OCS and pop a cookie in your mouth and go, all right, let's go to the boat show, which would be an awesome way to see a boat show, I think. But is that going to be legal? It's very strange, and it all comes down to enforcement. How much effort are the cops going to bother putting into this? And I think that cops across this country have a lot of damn gall to be asking for more money to enforce the new pot laws when they're already not doing enough to deal with crime that does exist while crime is dropping. Every year, cops get more numerous and wealthier, and crime continues to go down. But crime doesn't go down because there's more cops. Crime goes down because of other factors. It's a fairly complicated series of issues involving healthcare and opportunity for jobs and education and, the income of your parents and all kinds of stuff. So that's what keeps crime going down gradually over time. But more and more cops, more and more cops, more and more cops. So they got a lot of gall demanding more money all the time to do, hassling more people. Probably. I hope what they do is they get all this more money and then they go do other stuff. They just don't enforce pot laws. But I think where they're really going to focus is on the driving. Stopping everybody they see vaping, stopping everybody they see smoking is going to be arduous, time-consuming, costly, and pointless. But doing driving blitzes, ride programs, stuff like that, that's going to bring in the bucks. That's where they're going to find people, because anybody who's had pot in the last 3 weeks is going to test positive enough for an impairment charge of some kind. So even if you don't go to jail, even if you're not considered impaired, you'll still be getting fines. You'll be paying tickets because you had a little bit of, metabolites in your system from that joint you caught one whiff of at that cocktail party 3 weeks ago, or that one dab you had 2 weeks ago. It's insane. It's insane. And of course, Canadians are just kind of shrugging like, oh, what are you going to do? Because the media is kind of just, when the media reports scandals, like for example, the CBC were grilling Jagmeet Singh about his nuanced views on the use of violence in terms of Sikh independence. The guy strikes me as a pretty nonviolent type. And everything, but they were grilling this guy, just grilling him. They don't apply the same sort of pressure to Bill Blair or, the justice minister or the health minister or the prime minister. They ask them a question. They throw a bunch of talking points back. They ask another question. And they say some more talking points. It's insulting. It's insulting to Canadians. It would be insulting enough if we only had to sit through the advertising to pay for this, like Global, CTV, and stuff like that. You go, all right, well, at least I'm not paying for this. CBC, we're all paying for this. They're taking all of our money, our taxpayer money. We all pay tax every time we buy things or pay rent or, or pay our taxes. And they're taking the people's money and they're just propagandizing back to us, lying to us about cannabis, letting politicians lie. It's supposed to be their job to hold truth, to speak truth to power. They're supposed to hold these people's feet to the fire and complain about it and say, whoa, wait a minute, hold on. We did some fact checking about the stuff you said last time, and here's what we found. They don't do that when it comes to cannabis. They just let liars come on their show and lie. And it's disheartening because who do you even complain to? Your MP? The cops? CBC? Nobody at the CBC smokes pot. So that's the problem. I think they probably don't hire pot users. And you've got a bunch of smirking afternoon cocktail sippers who, were the smirking cocktail sippers in college. And they think they're great now because they actually got a job in journalism in a dying industry. So they feel pretty cocky now. Look at me. I'm paying my rent. And so, yeah, they're smug about pot. And they also know, this is an important factor, that deep down, it's about the audience. That headlines that say, pot beneficial, nothing to worry about, will not get the same number of clicks as the article entitled, Will the Legalization of Marijuana Bring About the Apocalypse? That's going to get some clickbait. That's going to get a lot of clicks on it. So they're putting the tone of their articles, the tone of their headlines into something that's going to be attractive to the casual click buyer. And that's difficult because we're not talking about journalism anymore. We're talking about them. They're basically carnival barkers. They're trying to get your attention. So when you're on Facebook and you're sitting there and you're maybe a little bit drunk or you're tired or you're a little bit stoned or whatever, you're sitting there feeling logy, scrolling through on your iPad. Oh, CBC article about pot. I'm going to go check that out. Oh, look, there's a bunch of ads. And this ad and that ad. You don't even look at them. It's some car ad or something or other. You're not even looking, but you've been exposed to advertising. And even if you don't look at it, that's counted. So it's all about the clicks. It's all about going to see. That's why they know that Mark and Jody Emery, always get Mark and Jody Emery in an article, it's going to get clicks. People are going to click it. Love them or hate them, people are going to click on that because they recognize the names. Luckily, Jody pretty much always says intelligent things. Mark, not so much lately. But there's lots of other activists out there who are becoming name activists. I like to mention them as often as I can. People like Abby Roach and Lisa Campbell. Tamara Cartwright, of course, you know her from her show here. And Debbie Stoltz-Giffen down east. The list goes on. I can't think of off the top of my head right now, but it's invigorating to see these women getting involved in what has largely been a male-dominated situation over the past several years in terms of dispensaries and this kind of stuff. So, we should do all we can to encourage. Speaking of which, Abby Roach has a $40,000 franchise package for people who want to open a hot box in their community. And it's not just like, oh yeah, here, pay me $40,000 so you can use the name. No. It's the total package. They help you with inventory and how to get things, like how to run the thing, how to do the books, the whole shebang. So if you're out there and you're listening and you're thinking, I don't really know how to run a lounge. How does one do that to make it profitable? Here's what you do. Rent a place and then call Abby Roach. You can find her all over the place. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, I'm sure. Just contact Hotbox Cafe in Toronto or the one in Jamaica. But yeah, that's something I'd love to do it. I physically do not have the wherewithal to follow through on any kind of stuff like that. I even have trouble getting our groceries, the way things are right now with my health and my wife's, but we're managing to push through. We get there. But the point is, I certainly haven't got what it takes to run or manage a lounge, a vapor lounge. I would love to. It would be interesting. But there's one thing that just occurred to me yesterday about vapor lounges. Let's say the government does regulate them. Let's say they have pretty good guidelines, right? No smoking, volcanoes, and the like, pot vaping pens, dab pens, and dabbing. No smoking. Okay, fair enough. And lounges like Hotbox Cafe become the norm. Suddenly you've got all these people who've just come from the OCS with their LP cannabis from whatever company, and they sit there volcanoing and, right next to you. Now you're sharing their volcano stuff, and what if that stuff has myclobutanil in it, right? It's happened. I personally have interviewed 2 people on my show. You can go see on YouTube, Pottawa. Forget which episodes, but they're both there. Interviews, and these guys have both been poisoned by 2 different companies. And years later, they're still sick. They're still having a lot of symptoms from what happened, from being exposed to some chemical or other that was in their pot that came from these companies. And what are you going to do? If you've got a huge situation of plants, you've got 80,000 plants or 100,000 plants in a huge greenhouse, and you notice you got this bug or that mold or whatever fungus, well, your choices are to use some cost and labor intensive remedies, or just gut the place and, wash it all clean and start over, scrap the whole crop, which can be extremely costly and detrimental for the company. Or maybe you sneak in a little bit of secret stuff, maybe stuff you're not supposed to use, stuff is going to do the trick and hopefully won't get caught in the long term. Now, I think most companies would probably not risk that unless it was do or die. A big company like Tweed, for example, I want to point out that Tweed has not yet been accused in any way of having any other chemicals they shouldn't have, as far as I know, so don't come suing me, you rat bastards. But a big company like Tweed, for example, if they've got a room, they got a contamination, they can afford to lose a crop, or 2, or 5. A smaller company, a newer company, maybe not. When Metrum was small and struggling, just getting there, that's what apparently happened. According to someone who has talked to the media, they were using a poison chemical they shouldn't have been using, and they were going out of their way to hide the bottles up inside the ceiling tiles because they knew the inspectors were coming. So this is the kind of stuff that the government needs to be more diligent about, not the labeling. People know it's pot. You don't have to put a great big scary warning label. They've even got a little red stop sign. You got to go see this. Just look up cannabis warning labels, Health Canada on YouTube or on Google or anything. And they've got a little stop sign with a pot leaf in it that says THC. It's insulting. It's absurd. And where they should really be putting the effort in all their inspection and their strict regulation is inspecting the LPs. And you want to give the LPs, you want to make sure they don't have any incentive to risk using these poison chemicals. You want to make sure there's some sort of insurance policy in place that the government can help these companies. If they go, look, we were a big supplier for 5 years. We had this many grams going to this company and we were doing great. Everything's great. Everything's great. All of a sudden, somehow we got this horrible contamination of mold X. We're going to sink if we don't get some help, right? We were doing okay before. We're going to sink like a stone if we don't get a bit of help because we can't afford to scrap this crop or save it. So we're going to die. Help us. What's going to happen to companies like that? There's going to be a lot of these companies, I think, are going to go bust because, pot is hard to, it's easy to grow. It's a very quick growing plant and it heals up quickly if there's been a contamination and you get rid of the contamination. But from a financial standpoint, that gets costly. And if they keep passing on the cost to the customers are going to shop elsewhere. And then you're going to have a situation where they're not making enough money to keep going. And you've got however many hundred people working at this nice big greenhouse someplace going, yeah, dig me, man. I work at a pot farm. I'm growing really nice, clean medicine for these. What? I'm fired? There's no job. I'm not fired. The job's gone. It's just not shit. Terrific. So that's going to happen. I'm not saying that to instill dread in people, but with so many companies being licensed and so many trying to be licensed, but just failing, because apparently they turn away 3 for every one that they license for whatever reasons, of a long list of reasons. This is going to be an issue. Some of these companies are going to flourish because they'll have the financial and technological wherewithal to take care of their plants, make sure they do not get any kind of contamination, and they can contain anything they do get. But other companies won't, and they're going to sink, and a lot of people are going to be very, very sad and go bankrupt and lose their money in their stocks and this kind of stuff. And I think I'm just hoping that the government doesn't stick their fingers into it too much, but listens to the industry and establishes some sort of safety protocol, not only for the product that they're producing and for the people who are using the product that's being produced, but for the companies who are producing it. Because we don't necessarily want 5 big companies growing all the pot that Canadians use in the next 10 years. I don't think that's what we fought for. It's not what I fought for. And on that note, I'm going to play my next song. This is a very cool song by a band called Tool from their album Lateralis. I think I'm pronouncing that right. From 2001. This is Schism.
So what are you doing?
Nothing.
Nothing? Why not?
Trying to get on this Lifestyle Radio website.
Sounds like a cool website.
Yeah, it's alright. Oh, wait, I might have it.
You might have it.
You're listening to Lifestyle Radio.
And we're back. Yes, that was Tool with Schism. I know the pieces fit. It was about a jigsaw puzzle, apparently. So one last thing I want to talk about. I've only got a few minutes here before I go. And the feds reject 3 cannabis growers for every 1 accepted. As of February 1st, this is from the National Post. As of Feb 1, Health Canada has granted 89 cannabis licenses and rejected 268 applications. Wow. Now, I mean, it could be for a variety of reasons. If you check it out, 268 is a pretty big number, so there's probably almost 268 different reasons why. And people shouldn't be worried about that. As someone with personal experience, it's hard to fill out paperwork perfectly, even when the paperwork is fairly simple. I've made mistakes on MMAR and ACMPR forms, and I'm sure somebody just forgot to cross a T or dot an I or check off a box or whatever, or their fence was 4 inches too short, or it was, too close to the building or too far from the building or whatever. And I guess they're picky about these kinds of things. Hopefully we'll get a little bit more leniency in terms of security as the situation goes on, because you don't need to saddle pot growers with a lot of heavy security things that they don't really need. Because once pot's legal, it's a lot less hassle to just grow some in your backyard or in your little cubby hole in your closet or whatever, your little tent in your living room, than it is to go bust into a greenhouse and get stuff that's probably not even ready for harvest yet. So on that, I just want to remind you that I do a show on YouTube called Pottawa. I've recently interviewed, as I said, 2 people who have been poisoned. I scooped all the local media about this family who got a $10,000 donation from the local dispensaries. Still no word. That story went worldwide about that family with 2 kids having cancer at the same time. But nobody picked up on the story about how a local pair of dispensaries raised $10,000 for this family, just handed them 10 grand in cash. So I scooped them. I scooped everybody locally, and we've scooped them many times. So go check out my show, Pottawa. It's a good show. I'm smart, and well, no, I mean, I don't stand there with a volcano bag. I don't stand there doing dabs, coughing away, going, yeah, tell me more. While my guest is answering the question, I try to keep it very tight and professional. It's a bit glitchy, where we often, Nate gets here to the studio, at Studio CBD here in Ottawa, across town from where he lives, about 20 minutes before the show starts. So he's got to do like all of this stuff as fast as he can. And sometimes we glitch, but we're getting better at that. So check it out. It's a good show. We're about 105 or 104 episodes deep now, and you'll enjoy it. Before I go, I've got one last song. We're going to play it out. And it's from the 1984 album by Pat Metheny called First Circle. And this is Yolanda, You Learn. Remember, only slaves obey. Good night.
Are you looking for cannabis news, education, and people's opinions? Are you looking to learn what Canadian and international cannabis advocates are doing, not only now, but what got them to this point in their lives, and what does the future hold for them? Do you want to learn how patients are using cannabis as their daily medication, or learn how their cannabis use helps them with their medical condition? If you answered yes to any of these questions, then I'm going to suggest to you to tune in to Lifestyle Radio. Catch their live weekly shows and have your questions and concerns answered and find the experience you're looking for. Monday, catch your weekly news broadcast with the Reef Reporters. Then on Wednesday, get several hours worth of cannabis public education. We get things started with cannabis and coffee with Tamarawana. Then tune in and catch Pottawa with Russell Barth, who calls himself the world's angriest pothead. Finish up your evening with the award-winning Pace Radio Show with Al Graham and joint host Kim Cooper and Alicia Yashishin. No week would be complete without tuning into Friday night's program, the 420 Radio Show featuring Al Rapp and the 420 Radio crew, Mary Jane Baker and Marcel Gignac. Cannabis is a lifestyle, and you can catch all your cannabis lifestyle information right here at lifestyleradio.net or at our sister site, 420radio.ca.
You're listening to Lifestyle Radio.